Okay, so now we come to Ezekiel 16, which is an extended metaphor, or allegory, I guess you could say, of Israel and the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. We're going to have a couple of these in the book of Ezekiel. And this is an example of Ezekiel delivering a message and intending to get a reaction that is different from the sort of reaction that we're likely going to have to it when we read it today. Okay, Ezekiel, when he speaks this message of this allegory of Jerusalem to the people, both here in chapter 16 and later when he does another one similar to this, is intending to kind of provoke a certain sort of emotional reaction out of his listeners. But today, with a very, very, very different cultural and historical backdrop and that we see the world through, we will have like a different reaction than what he expects. So this is one of those examples where we have to understand the message that he is speaking, the audience to whom he is speaking it, and what he is hoping to get across to them. Because he's not going to be getting across the same message to us. And that's not his fault. It's not our fault either. I mean, we don't live in Ezekiel's day, so he is not speaking this to us directly. But the burden is on us then to make the effort to understand what he's speaking. Because it's not going to come across to us the way it was supposed to. And that's just because we're living in a different time and space. Totally different. And it doesn't make it impossible for us to understand this the way it was meant to be understood. We can. But it does mean that the burden is on us to do that. Ezekiel's not going to change his message today. Okay, Ezekiel's been dead for 2,500 plus years. He is not going to suddenly come back to life and rewrite this passage to make it more palatable to our current cultural standards. We have to approach him on his terms because he is not going to approach us on our terms. The word of the Lord came to me. It's Ezekiel 16. The word of the Lord came to me. Son of man, confront Jerusalem with her detestable practices and say, this is what the sovereign Lord says to Jerusalem. Your ancestry and birth were in the land of the Canaanites. Your father was an Amorite, and your mother a Hittite. He's basically saying that they come from a long line of idolaters. I don't know how literal this whole father being an Amorite, mother being a Hittite is. I mean, Jerusalem was a Hittite city. Not Hittite. It was a Jebusite city. This area, of course, was the land of the Canaanites. Okay, Canaan, the son of one of the sons of Ham, his descendants went to this area and settled it in the days of after the flood and after the Tower of Babel. The Hebrews were promised it, the descendants of Eber, and then Abraham were promised it, even though the descendants of Canaan were living there at the time. So it is true the land was originally the Canaanites' land. Jerusalem itself was a Jebusite city all the way until the time of David. The Amorites and the Hittites still lived there and were still around that area for hundreds of years, even after the Israelites came into the area. And I don't know, maybe is he referring to Sarah being a Hittite? Maybe Abraham got his wife Sarah from the Hittites. I don't know. But the concept being presented here is that there is a long line of idolatry in their background. Now, we do need to be careful not to take this message too literally. We can't press the details of this image too tightly on top of their actual history. This is an allegory. This is a message that's being communicated through a story. It's figurative. It's not one-to-one, for example. Okay, yes, the land that they lived in was originally inhabited by the Canaanites, but Abraham was not an Amorite. Sarah may have been a Hittite. I'm not sure. Maybe he did get her from the Hittites. I don't know. But it's like we can't be too forceful in pushing the narrative of this story onto the actual details of their history. We just have to allow the story as it's being presented to us to speak a message and leave an impression on us. And the message that's being spoken and the impression that's being left here is that you have a long line, a long history of idolatry in your background. Don't think of yourselves too highly. Don't think of yourselves as more righteous and faithful than you are, because you're not, and you never have been. Don't be proud. Don't be proud of your own righteousness. On the day you were born, your cord was not cut. So we're using the imagery of an actual birth here. Nor were you washed with water to make you clean. Nor were you rubbed with salt or wrapped in cloths. No one looked on you with pity, or had compassion enough to do any of these things for you. Rather, you were thrown out into the open field. For on the day you were born, you were despised. That happens. It happened back then. We'll find out as we read through this. This is a girl child being born here. This is a baby girl being born. And they didn't want her, so they just threw her out in the open field and let the elements or the animals take care of her. That would have happened back then. And, it still does, especially with girl children. Sometimes you don't want a girl, so you get rid of her. I mean, that's still, I don't know if, I always grew up hearing about the policy in China limiting a family to like 2 children or something like that, so girl children had a tendency to get thrown away and discarded, and I don't know if that's still going on or not, but that's always been kind of a tendency in human culture to do that. Then I passed by, so God is picturing himself or describing himself here as a passing traveler. Then I passed by and saw you kicking about in your blood. And as you lay there in your blood, I said to you, so this is as humiliating an image as you could come up with. Okay? He's called them idolaters. He said that their parents were idolaters. They come from a land of idolatry. And now he's comparing them to a naked, bleeding girl infant who's dying in a field somewhere. Like this is as humiliating and down to the bottom of the absolute bottom of the ladder as you can possibly get. He's cutting away their pride, in other words. He's impressing upon them the fact that they were nothing special. They thought of themselves as pretty special, as pretty big deals, and he is stripping them of that illusion and saying that, no, you were just, from my perspective, you were a naked, bloody, crying infant dying in an open field somewhere. You can't get more helpless than that. And as you lay there in your blood, I said to you, live. I made you grow like a plant of the field. You grew up and developed and became the most beautiful of jewels. You became mature. Your breasts were formed and your hair grew, you who were naked and bare. So you were nothing. You were discarded, you were forgotten, you were deliberately, you were rejected, you were lying about naked in your blood, crying and dying in an open field, absolutely helpless, absolutely unwanted, until God came along and said to you, live. I think that word itself kind of sums up God's desire for his entire creation. We've already seen him talk to the unrepentant and saying, repent. Why insist on continuing to do wrong and leading to your own destruction? God's desire is for everyone to come back to him. God's desire for his entire creation is for it to live. We saw the imagery of these 4 living creatures that Ezekiel later identified as the cherubim that were decorating the temple. Or at least these are the things that decoration of the temple were based on. And they represented the creation. They represented man and beast and animal and bird. And we see them again in John, called the living creatures, again representing that. God's intent for his entire creation has always been for it to live. Later I passed by, and when I looked at you and saw that you were old enough for love, I spread the corner of my garment over you and covered your nakedness. I gave you my solemn oath and entered into a covenant with you. This would be referring to the Mosaic covenant. So there is a period of growing up that went on from the time he called Abraham's people out of out of Ur of the Chaldees, which is, by the way, where they are again now. Ur of the Chaldees is basically near Babylon. So this is where Abraham started. They're back to where they began in the days of Abraham and his father. So he called them out of Ur, had him come to the land that he will show him, which is west of Babylon, up the Euphrates River, and then into the promised land of Canaan. But he didn't give it to Abraham. He gave it to his descendants, which happened a few generations later. And that would be what he's talking about here, like when you're mature, when you're old enough. So this would be in the days of Moses, when he called them out of Egypt to be a nation. I gave you my solemn oath and entered into a covenant with you, declares the sovereign Lord, and you became mine. I bathed you with water and washed the blood from you and put ointments on you. I clothed you with an embroidered dress and put leather sandals on you. I dressed you in fine linen and covered you with costly garments. I adorned you with jewelry. I put bracelets on your arms and a necklace around your neck. And I put a ring on your nose, earrings on your ears, and a beautiful crown on your head. So you were adorned with gold. He gave her everything she could ever possibly want. He did everything for her that he could ever possibly do. So you were adorned with gold and silver. Your clothes were of fine linen and costly fabric and embroidered cloth. Your food was fine flour, honey, and olive oil. You became very beautiful and rose to be a queen. And your fame spread among the nations on account of your beauty, because the splendor I had given you made your beauty perfect, declares the sovereign Lord. But you trusted in your beauty and used your fame to become a prostitute. You lavished your favors, on anyone who passed by, and your beauty became his. There's a footnote down here. No big deal. So anyone who wanted it, she offered herself up to anybody who came by. You took some of your garments to make gaudy high places, where you carried on your prostitution. Such things should not happen, nor should they ever occur. You also took the fine jewelry I gave you, the jewelry made of my gold and silver, and you made for yourself male idols and engaged in prostitution with them. And you took your embroidered clothes to put on them. So you took the clothes I gave you and you put on your idols instead. So they decorated these things. They didn't just carve them up and carve them out and stand them up in their houses. They were decorating them with clothes and things like that. And you took your embroidered clothes to put on them, and you offered my oil and incense before them. So all these things I'd given you, these were all mine: the gold, the silver, the oil, the incense, the clothes. They were mine. I gave them to you, and now you're putting them on these idols. Also the food I provided for you, the fine flour, the olive oil, and the honey I gave you to eat, you offered as fragrant incense before them. This is what happened, declares the sovereign Lord. And you took your sons and daughters, whom you bore to me, and sacrificed them as food to the idols. Was your prostitution not enough? You slaughtered my children and sacrificed them to the idols. In all your detestable practices and your prostitution, you did not remember the days of your youth, when you were naked and bare, kicking about in your blood. Woe! Woe to you, declares the sovereign Lord. In addition to all your other wickedness, you build a mound for yourself and make a lofty shrine in every public square. At the head of every street, you built your lofty shrines and degraded your beauty, offering your body in increasing promiscuity, with increasing promiscuity, so with increasing fervor, doing it more and more as time went on, to anyone who passed by. You engaged in prostitution with the Egyptians, your lustful neighbors, and provoked me to anger with your increasing promiscuity. So I stretched out my hand against you and reduced your territory. Now, he did this to them a number of times over the years, so I'm not entirely certain what exact incident this is referring to, because as we read throughout the historical books, he did this to them a number of times over the years. I gave you over to the greed of your enemies, the daughters of the Philistines, who were shocked by your lewd conduct. You engaged in so that might have, we read a lot about them fighting the Philistines in the Judges in the early days of the king. Samuel, he dealt with the Philistines. David did too. Saul and David did too. So that could be referring to them. I don't know exactly. You engaged in prostitution with the Assyrians too. We read about that in the days of Ahaz. Ahaz made an alliance with Assyria. They were shackled by it for a number of years. Because you were insatiable, and even after that, you still were not satisfied. Then you increased your promiscuity to include Babylonia, a land of merchants. But even with this, you were not satisfied. So they had Egypt to begin with. Of course, that's where they came from originally. Then they had the Philistines, who were in the land with them simultaneously for a long time. Then the Assyrians and the Babylonians. There were a lot of others that came with over the years. He's just kind of giving us a broad stroke of their history in the form of this parable. How weak-willed you are, declares the sovereign Lord, when you do all these things, acting like a brazen prostitute. When you built your mounds at the head of every street, and made your lofty shrines in every public square, you were unlike a prostitute, because you scorned payment. You didn't even get paid for these things. In fact, you paid them to come do it with you. You adulterous wife! You prefer strangers to your own husband. Every prostitute receives a fee. But you give gifts to all your lovers, so you pay them to come and have sex with you, bribing them to come to you from everywhere for your illicit favors. So in your prostitution, you are the opposite of others. No one runs after you for your favors. You are the very opposite, for you give payment and none is given to you. Therefore, you prostitute, hear the word of the Lord. Now this, of course, is supposed to be very shocking to the people. This imagery is chosen specifically to be very stunning to the people. We don't have that same effect. It doesn't have that same effect on us. But this would have been, a blow to them. All of this is meant to really cut at their cores. It doesn't do that to us. We don't have the same concept of this sort of thing. But remember, the entire concept of human marriage, the entire institution of human marriage was set up by God at the very beginning to illustrate the point that God wanted to make of how he sees himself and how we should see our relationship with him. The husband-wife relationship that was instituted by God way back in Genesis 2 is meant to demonstrate, teach us a point about how we are supposed to see our relationship with him. And in this figure, from the beginning of the Bible to the end, God is the husband and the church, his people are the wife. The entire reason why we have human gender, period, why he made male and female to begin with, is because he wanted to communicate this point. Now, we don't see it that way today because we don't like this idea of human gender or whatever. We don't like the idea that there's supposed to be something that we're supposed to learn from the differences between the sexes and all that. Like this was, we were intentionally made this way to demonstrate concepts to us that we were supposed to learn from, and we don't like that. So we don't have the same reaction to these kinds of texts and these kinds of lessons that the ancient people were supposed to. Ezekiel's readers would have, or at least they should have.